So there's Zechariah, this man who has been faithful to God and is part of the priestly lineage. So he's a leader. But yet he's been praying for something for a long time, and God has not chosen to answer his prayer. He's been asking for a child, and he and his wife, Elizabeth, are getting on up there in age, and figure it's probably past the point of that being possible. But then we see in Luke chapter 1 and the passage that Johnny read for us earlier, where the angel comes to Zechariah and says, this thing that you thought was impossible is possible. And not only is it possible, but it's going to happen. And here's what's going to happen. Zechariah's been praying for a long time. And you could think that, like most guys, if he's praying for a child, most likely, especially in the first century, he's probably praying for a son too. He's most certainly been praying for the coming of the Messiah. And because he prayed for the Messiah, he also, being a part of the priestly lineage, would know that there was going to be a forerunner to the Messiah, someone who would come and pave the way. He should have been ready. This shouldn't have been a huge surprise to him. If we're going to pray, we need to pray expecting an answer, don't we? I mean, here's a man who's in the priestly lineage who has a close relationship with God and probably has an excellent prayer life, and here he's been praying all this time, and finally his prayers are coming to fruition, and God is saying, I'm going to answer your prayer, and yet he doesn't seem to be ready for that. It seems to be a little bit of a surprise to him. He wasn't ready for the angel who stands in his presence before God. And before we get too upset with him, though, I think we need to think about this. This is after about 400 years of God really not speaking to people like this. The time between the Old and New Testament is roughly about 400 years, and we don't have any mention of God visiting somebody in the manner that he is visiting Zechariah now. These are things that Zechariah has heard, and these are things that Zechariah knows, but he's never actually experienced it, and he's never known anybody personally who has experienced it. And so here he is, and so maybe, just maybe, we can understand a little bit about his hesitancy to really take in fully what's happening here. But he's been praying. Is he ready for his prayer to be answered? You know, all of us face challenges and twists and turns in life at different times. You know, there are things that surprise us. There are things that happen that are unknown, and we're not really sure what's going to happen next. And then something happens. And then we're face to face with the reality of what God is doing in our lives, and sometimes we aren't quite ready for it. But I think it's very important to understand one thing in our life with Christ and in our faithfulness going forward, and that's that we have to keep moving. In everything that we do, we have to be willing to keep moving. But what does that really mean? What are we really talking about there? How can we make sure that we do keep moving? And I think there are some insights here in the life of Zechariah and his response to what is happening that'll help us. And the first one is that when reality and doubt collide, keep going. You see, there's a real crisis of faith here almost that's happening, where he's been praying for this. He wants God to do this, to bless him and to give him a child, but yet when God comes and says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this in your life, and you're going to have a child, and this child is going to be the one that paves the way for the Messiah, then his first response is, how can this be? How in the world is this going to happen? How is this possible? Have you ever wondered how God was going to handle something in your life? You know, a lot of times we go through different things in life, and we go through different difficulties and different situations and changes in our lives, and we ask God to be present in those changes and in those times, and we want God to work out his will and to do the things that he needs to do, and that we will be ready for it. But yet, sometimes when it begins to happen, we begin to wonder. Have you ever thought that God was maybe asking you to do something a little bit more than what you were capable of handling? Because here's Zechariah, and he's an old man. He's gotten to this point in life where he is well beyond the age of somebody who should be becoming a parent, who should be bringing a child into this world, and yet here it is happening, and so it's no wonder that he would ask, how is this possible? I've seen Elizabeth and her life and the hurt and the heartache of wanting a child and it not happening, and maybe she's just finally gotten to the point where she's accepted the fact that maybe it's not going to happen, and then all of a sudden you tell me it's going to happen, and I don't understand how this is going to be. I don't know that I'm really the one to handle this. See, a lot of times we ask God to do things, and then we wonder whether or not he'll do them, and then when he does them, then we wonder whether or not he's picked the right person to do it. You know, there have been times in my life where I didn't really know what it was I was supposed to do or where I was supposed to be. If I'd been called to something, then why wasn't it working the way that I thought it should work out? If I was doing exactly what God wanted me to do, then why wasn't it happening the way that I thought it should happen? And then I start realizing that it's not really about the way that I think it should happen. Then I think to myself, if all the things that in my life had not taken place the way that they had taken place, then I wouldn't be where I am. And the fact of the matter is that some of us are so worried about where God is going to take us that we don't pay attention to where God has us right now. Where does God have you right now? What is it that he's trying to accomplish in your life right now? Some of us are so focused on what's next, that we need to think about what's now. Why don't we just stop and enjoy and be thankful that God is working in our lives right now. That He's here, that He's present, and that He's active. And see, when that reality collides with that doubt, when you start wondering whether or not you're really capable. We talked this past Wednesday night about the fact that we sometimes shy away from sharing our faith, and we shy away from really being who God has called us to be because maybe we think we're not capable or that we're not prepared or that we're not smart enough or that we're not talented enough or that we're whatever. And the fact of the matter is that even in the midst of any doubt that we have about ourselves to do whatever it is, that God is going to make sure that we have a way. And so when that reality comes in, when that opportunity arises and presents itself, even when the doubts in the back of your mind of whether or not am I capable of this? Can I do this? And is this going to make a difference? That you have to realize that it's then that you have to keep going. You have to be willing to take that next step. When reality and doubt collide, keep going. And then you have to understand that at the proper time is God's time. And that when the proper time happens, when it's God's time, that you keep going. Look at verse 20. In verse 20 of chapter 1, he says, and this is the angel speaking, and now you will be silent and will not be able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time. You see, Zechariah had his ideas. It would have been better for me to have a child when I was of a certain age, because I would have been more equipped to handle it, or I would have had the energy, or it would have just seemed like the proper time and the proper place and the proper point in my life. But yet God has a different plan, and God's timing is always the proper timing. We don't really think about that because we get so wrapped up in our own timing and our own schedules and the way that we have things figured out in life. And, we make plans for ourselves, and by this age I'm going to be doing this, and by this age I'm going to be doing that, and by this point in my life I'll be here, and by this point in my life I'll be there. But the fact of the matter is that it's really about where God wants you and what He wants to be happening in your life. In Job, the 42nd chapter, verse 2, Job says, I know that you can do all things, and no plan of yours can be thwarted. That Job understands that God can do whatever He wants to do. We all have our plans. As we were doing sermon prep this past week, this story kind of resonates with my brother George a great deal, because he had a son later on in life. He has 3 children. My niece Tiffany, who's 25, my niece Alexis, who's 23, and my nephew Stuart, who's 14. And as you can tell, there's a little bit of an age gap there. And that age gap was not a planned age gap. It just is the way that it is. And they actually lost several children through the years for different times, and they lost at different stages in the pregnancies, and it was very difficult for them. And George said he had kind of just resigned himself to the fact that he was going to have the two children, and that was going to be it, and he was okay with that. And lo and behold, Stuart, his son, came along. He just says he was 46 when Stuart was born, and he said it was a little bit of a scary time for him. He said he wondered if he was going to be ready for this, and if it was going to work out the way that it was supposed to work out, and he said, but there was so much that he realized that he had learned. That if he had had a son at the same time that he had his two daughters, he wasn't ready. He said he didn't realize that then, but he realizes it now. There was some change that he had to go through as a husband, as a father, as a man, as a preacher, to be ready to be the father to his son that he was supposed to be. And he realized that God's timing was perfect. Zechariah and Elizabeth maybe thought they were ready at different points in their life. They thought they were ready, but apparently they weren't ready, because God chose to wait and bring John into the world at the time that he did. And it's hard for us to sometimes accept the fact that God's timing is different than our timing. But we have to understand that God's timing is perfect timing. Chris and I tried for almost 8 years to have a child before Sydney was born. It was a very trying time in our life, and in our relationship, and in our lives, and I think it was harder on Krista than it was on me. I think she put a lot of pressure on herself that she kind of bore a lot of the blame, even though there was really no blame to be assessed, but she kind of took that upon herself, and it was hard for her. But then Sydney was born. Then that 8 years of trial and tribulation, that 8 years of driving back and forth to Atlanta and going to doctors and having a surgery and all the things that she had to go through physically and emotionally, and all those things just kind of seemed to melt away. Now when we look back on that time in our lives, it doesn't seem quite as trying. It seemed that God was maybe preparing us for something. Because I can tell you this, when Sydney was born, we were so incredibly thankful. So incredibly appreciative to God for what he had done. That we just were overwhelmed with joy. It's funny, a lot of people are weird when they have babies. People get weird. I'm just going to tell you, people get weird when they have babies. Like you have to scrub down like you're going to surgery before you can touch them and be around them, and we got to put them in a bubble to keep you away from them and all that sort of thing. And my mom she was laughing one holiday not long after Sydney had been born, and I said, "What's so funny?" And she said, "You would think that as long as y'all waited to have a child, that y'all would be like freaky parents. Like nobody can touch her but us, And she goes, and I'm sitting here looking, and everybody's just passing her around and playing with her and talking to her. And I'm like, man, we waited a long time for this to happen. So this is exactly what we want to happen. We want people to be around her. We want her to realize how much joy she's brought into our family's life. We want her to feel that. We want people to hold her and to know her and to love her. We don't want to protect her from that. We want to expose her to that. Because we were thankful. Because God's time is the perfect time. And it's important, too, to see that Zechariah, when all this happens, that the last thing that he does is not what we would probably expect him to do. See, I'm not sure what would have happened if I had been approached by an angel and told that I was going to have a child, and I asked how that was going to be, maybe what I thought might be an innocent question, and then the angel would say, well, because you didn't believe, I'm going to shut your mouth. And suddenly I couldn't talk. You would think that it would be easy then to just say, I've been punished by God, and I've disobeyed, and this is terrible, and I'm just going to shut down and give up. But what does it say? Look at verse 23. When the time of his service was completed, he returned home. That's pretty interesting. Well, let's go back to verse 22 and look at that. It says, when he came out after seeing the angel, he could not speak to them. They realized he had seen a vision in the temple, for he kept making signs to them, but remained unable to speak. But yet, even with this punishment, I guess, that's been given out to him, he doesn't shut down. See, sometimes in life, when we go through difficulty, the first inclination that we have is just to shut down, to give up. Anytime we go through any hardship, I might as well just give up. We go through any kind of difficulty in life, I might as well give up. We go through difficulty in our marriage, I'll just give up. We go through difficulty in the church, I'll just give up. We go through any kind of difficulty. It's just easier just to say, I'm not going to deal with it. I just quit. But that's not what Zechariah does. In fact, he continues on with his duties, and he continues on doing the things that he knows that he's supposed to do. Listen, we are tempted to give up when things don't go our way. And I'm not going to pretend that we're not. He could have said, what's the point in continuing on? What's the point of me serving? What's the point of me taking to heart what this angel has said now that this has happened to me? He could have blamed it on Elizabeth. It happens. We have difficulty in life, and the first thing we do is we attack those that are the closest to us. He didn't do any of that. He returned home. He went back to doing the things that he was supposed to do. And I think this is a vital thing for us to know and for us to understand, that we have to keep going in the right direction. We can't shut down. We've got to keep going. Listen, not everything is going to go right in your life. Not everything is going to go right in every plan that you have. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of things are probably going to go wrong. A lot of things are going to happen in life that maybe we don't plan for, but we have got to keep going. The right direction is the direction that God wants us to go in. The right direction is to follow the way that He has sent us, and to be ready to continue to do the things that He wants us to do. And just imagine if He had just said, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be this kid's dad. I'm not going to allow this to happen. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what this angel is all about. I don't know why my wife's going to have a baby. I'm just done here. I'm not dealing with this. Have you ever tried to get out of a place where everybody else was trying to get in? You know, like everybody else is going this direction and you're trying to go that direction. I'm not a huge fan of enormous crowds. But when I was in college, my sophomore year of college, I had not seen a lot of my high school friends since high school. And I got a call from one of my friends. He was in a fraternity at Georgia Tech, and he said, a bunch of us are going to get together on New Year's Eve, and we're going to go downtown Atlanta, and watch the peach drop. He goes, you want to come with us? And I said, sure. So we all decided to go, and so we met at his frat house at Tech, and went and got on the MARTA train and went to Underground where the peach was going to drop, and so we get out, and we got out of the MARTA station, and I mean, when you want to, a mass of humanity that I've never seen in my life before. I mean, just crazy. And I've lived in Atlanta all my life, but I've never been in a crowd like that before or since, and never have any desire to ever again. And so this girl that I had grown up with, she was right there with me, and another friend, and we got separated from the rest of our group. And the girl that I was with began to get a little bit panicky, because I think she was a little bit claustrophobic, and I didn't want to tell her I was too, but I just told her, I said, just grab onto my belt and don't let go. And so she got behind me and grabbed onto my belt, and we made our way through the crowd until we found the rest of our group, and it was crazy. Like I said, I will never ever do that again. But while we're trying to find our group, everybody else is trying to get away, because the peaches dropped and everything's happened, and they're trying to get out. So I mean, we're just going against this mass of humanity, and it seems pretty daunting. And we didn't know if we would ever find where we were supposed to be going, but we did. Jesus said, "Come follow me." And we live in a world where we are going totally against the flow, where we are totally going against the grain, where we are totally going against the way. And Jesus says, "Follow me." And what we have to do, what we have to be willing to do in our lives, is we need to be willing to grab hold of Him. We need to be willing to grab hold of Him and follow Him. And let Him take us wherever He's going to take us. And let Him show us where it is that we need to be. Listen, Jesus is way more qualified to tell us where to go. than we are. It's amazing to me to be with somebody who has a good sense of direction, because I don't. You can ask Krista. There have been many times when we've been in the car and her question to me is, do you have any idea where we are? And I always tell her, no, absolutely not, I don't. But eventually we get to where we're supposed to be. You know, I'm maybe the only person in the world that can get lost with GPS. And it still happens. We went to a wedding not too terribly long ago, and it was up near Ringgold somewhere, and the GPS was taking us, and all of a sudden it tells us to turn on a road that's not there. And so here we are in the middle of the Northwest Georgia mountains with no idea where to go. So I said, well, if we drive around long enough, we'll find it. And we did. But if we want real direction in life, then we have to follow Christ. And we have to be willing, no matter what, to just keep going. No matter what's happening and what's taking place, we have to be willing to keep moving and keep going. And to always know that he's going to lead us to where we need to be. Zechariah finally understood what the plan was. And when people were speculating what this baby's name was going to be, he finally wrote, his name will be John. And at that moment, his mouth was opened and he was able to speak. Can you imagine the joy of being able to speak again and to talk about what God was doing in his life? Listen, you have a voice, and you have the ability to speak, and you have the ability to let people know what God is doing in your life. Don't stop. Just keep going and follow him. Let's pray.